Here to speak with us tonight about a very serious, important issue is Mr. Peter Taussig.
Is it working? Yeah, it's working. Well, one of the things I'm going to do, in addition to talking about what happened in Berkeley, is I'm going to explain to you the difference between the two different kinds of 911 numbers. And to make this work, I'd like everybody to take a piece of paper, if they've got one handy, and just write down the numbers 911. And we'll get to that in a little bit, because I think you'll understand it by the time I finish. How many have read about what happened in Berkeley in February? Have you all? Some, not all of you. Okay, it's a small number. On one evening in February, a former neighbor of mine, who I knew, and was a friend, sort of, more an acquaintance. My kids babysat for his kids because he was a little younger. His kids were a little younger. He'd moved about 1.5 miles away. He lived a few doors away. And one night, during one of our warm spells, he and his wife had been out for dinner. They came home at around 8:45 in the evening. And there was a guy who looked like he didn't belong there in their garage and skulking around their yard, which is sort of an isolated, gated piece of property at the top of the Berkeley Hills. So he went home, and the guy continued to prowl around the house, looked like he might be breaking in. And at 8:45 in the evening, he called the police. The call was taken by the dispatcher, but nobody was dispatched to see him. And about a little over 10 minutes later, when nobody had responded, he left his house, avoided confronting this guy, and went to a firehouse that was about 100 yards away to try to get help, since there wasn't any response coming. The firehouse was vacant because the firemen were off on a call to a fire. And as he went back to the house, the guy had moved and confronted him. He beat him to death with a flower pot. The prowler beat the homeowner to death with a flower pot in the homeowner's front yard. That occurred 13 minutes after he had placed the call for help. No help was coming. His wife called the police a second time, and this time they came to write the report on the fellow's death. I don't know what moved him to go outside. I don't know what moved him to go outside without a weapon, other than he was a good Berkeley resident who couldn't imagine anybody doing anything violent. So I live in the belly of a liberal beast. But what is even more interesting is the reaction of the police department. The police department maintains to this day that they did nothing wrong. They have told one lie after another. The first lie that they told was that they said, well, he called on a non-emergency number. That's a lie. He called on an emergency number for cell phones that they put out, and it was programmed into his cell phone. That's the line that he called. The police have gotten sensitive about that, and they now say, well, it doesn't make any difference what number he calls on, because if you call on the non-emergency number and the emergency number, all the calls get handled the same way. And he didn't sound like he was really upset or it was an emergency. Well, he was calm, but he made it very clear that it was an emergency. They've released a transcript, an edited transcript of the telephone call. I can only imagine what the unedited one will sound like, because the edited one was pretty damning. He made it clear that this was an emergency and that he was dealing with a residential prowler. I've been involved in training police officers for over 50 years. and a residential prowler is always an emergency. They said, well, we were in the middle of a shift change at 8:45. At 8 o'clock possibly, 9 o'clock possibly, 8:45 they're in the middle of a shift change. Next lie that they told is the police chief at a community meeting said the police department is going through a real examination of the whole thing. We're being very introspective to see what we could have done differently. That is what the police chief said 3 weeks later. In response to a question, he said he could not say whether an officer who had volunteered to answer the call, who was 8 minutes away when the call came in, and was instructed not to go, whether that car was the closest one to the residence or not. This was after a period of 3 weeks of deep study and introspection. He didn't know if that was the closest car. He also did not know how many cars they had on patrol at the time, where they were located, or what they were doing that had greater priority. They couldn't tell that. That's after 3 weeks of deep introspection and it's self-examination. The lesson of this, and pardon me for using Latin, which I will translate, is nemo curat. Does anybody here study Latin? Anybody know Latin? No? Okay. No old Catholics here. Nemo curat means nobody cares. Nobody cares. The lesson here is that your life and the life of your family, the members of your family, is not as important to anybody as it is to you. They don't care. It's not important to them. They were more concerned, apparently, about being on hand to protect the University of California property from the Occupy movement, maybe. Even though the University of California in Berkeley has its own police department. We don't know what the police were doing. They won't tell you. Nemo curat. Nobody cares. The next thing you've got to understand is that if that homeowner had gone outside and defended himself with a firearm, given the state of the law in California, he would probably be in the same position as George Zimmerman, except he would have been arrested right away. In California, even though we have a very good and very strong stand your ground law here in California, the policy of every police department in the metropolitan area of California is if you shoot somebody, even in self-defense, that's a defense that you can raise at trial. You will win, but you'll spend somewhere between $60,000 and $500,000 paying lawyers in order to get that acquittal. And that's wonderful because I know that paying legal fees is the highest calling in American life.
As an attorney, he knows.
I describe myself as a recovering attorney. Thank you. There's a fellow by the name of John Farnham who uses the phrase Nemo curat as training. It's Defense Training International. He's one of the he's been voted by all the eminent firearms instructors as their exemplar. And he uses the term Nemo curat. But as one police officer that participates in his training said, people have to realize that everyone is on their own. The world is a dangerous place. Life is not as important to anyone else as it is to you. So take responsibility for being prepared to take care of yourself and those dear to you. Then we have the media to deal with. The Berkeley case didn't receive much attention. At the same time, in Florida, that Trayvon Martin was shot by George Zimmerman, apparently in self-defense. There was a double murder. Two British tourists were shot dead for the fun of it and for whatever goods they were carrying. It was shot by a black man. No interest. How many of you ever heard about the case in California where, California, not in North Carolina a couple of years ago? It was a gang of, a black gang, incidentally, who abducted a young white couple. I won't describe the hideous torture they went through before they spent 2.5 days dying. Didn't get mentioned in the press. There's been a little bit about this beating in Alabama, where the people, where this mob beat up and sent a guy to the hospital critically injured and left him lying broken, bleeding in the street, saying, "This is justice for Trayvon Martin."
That was a black mob.
It was a black mob. That's right. Now I'm going to tell you something, and this is politically incorrect, and I have to excuse myself for saying this because that's the kind of society we now live in. I worked in the civil rights movement in the South before it became popular. I was down there in 1956, the fall of 1956, when the schools were being integrated. And it was a violent time. And I worked with the American Friends Service Committee, and I lived in a house where, in two different communities, same experience, where the mobs came by at night, white mobs came by at night, and threw Molotov cocktails at the house and shot at the house. Okay? I did that because I believed in the civil rights movement. I have to tell you that to explain that I'm really not a bigot, or at least I wasn't, and I still don't think I am. But I do believe that we have a problem, and it is a racial problem, and it is a subculture. It's certainly not all black people, but there is an underclass of black people, and you cannot deal with a problem if you cannot discuss it honestly. And that's a problem that we've got, and we damn well better deal with it. Because the Reverend Sharpton and the Reverend Jesse Jackson are doing their best to bring about a race war. And if we can't deal with the problem, that's where we're going to end up. And I don't like that. But our politicians don't seem to care. Incidentally, I'll give you a definition of politics today. Poly. Do you know what poly means in Latin? Many. And you know what ticks are? They're swarming, blood-sucking parasites. That's politics today. George Zimmerman, poor guy. The local police had a reason for not arresting him. There was one investigator that did want to arrest him, but this was reviewed by the police chief, who has a good record. He was reviewed by the local district attorney, who also has a good record. And they named a special prosecutor. And the reason the special prosecutor came in was to appease the mob. They wanted to buy peace. So George Zimmerman is being offered up as a human sacrifice to that mob. If a judge presumes to dismiss the charge, as he probably should,
the judge will probably become a target, and the new Black Panther Party will probably offer a large bounty for the judge's head. Just as
Holder will not go after him.
Pardon me?
Holder will not go after
Oh, no. You're absolutely right. Eric Holder, actually, the U.S. Justice Department has never brought a hate crime against a black for any crime against a white.
Absolutely true.
And not a one. Blacks are incapable of committing a hate crime. Hate crimes are something only that white people commit. Incidentally, on the subject of George Zimmerman, does anybody here know who Alan Dershowitz is?
Sure.
Okay, Alan Dershowitz is a Harvard Law School professor and a leader of in many liberal progressive causes, and he says that the George Zimmerman charge is bogus and that any judge ought to dismiss it, that there is no probable cause for the crime. And I can go into a lot of details on that because I have made a study of that case. But it goes beyond the point. I want to transition here. Did you have a question?
I was just going to have a comment on that. Under Florida law, you can't bring a civil suit for wrongful death unless there's an arrest.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
He said in Florida you can't bring a civil suit.
Under Florida law, you cannot bring a case for civil wrongful death unless there's an arrest to begin with. The speculation is that they offered up the arrest strictly to allow them to go after Zimmerman on a civil charge of wrongful death.
Okay.
Still a sacrifice.
I want to go on into the broader Second Amendment issues here, and I'm getting into familiar territory here. Those of you who heard me the last time I was here, but my views have become even more Neanderthalish than they were then. The Second Amendment was not enacted so that we could go out and shoot Bambi. The people that enacted it knew that life is uncertain, and we've got to face up to that today. What is normal? We all tend to think of normal being what we've experienced in our lifetimes, but our lifetimes are very short duration in terms of what the length of human existence on this earth. And if you want to go what the norm is actually barbarism and chaos. This civilization is very thin. And just think about what our society is going to be like if we have a major earthquake. Just think about what it's going to be like if you had a tsunami. Or what it's going to be like if we have a biological, chemical, or cyber attack that causes all of our support structures to crumble. I would suggest to you that the mobs from San Francisco are going to be headed this way because they're not going to be able to get to the East Bay, and they're not going to be able to get to Marin County, and they're not going to have the necessities of life in San Francisco, so they're going to head down the peninsula. If that happens. Now, I'm going to also say something that is sort of shocking, but I'm going to try to back it up a little bit, and that is the potential threat posed by our own government. This is very politically incorrect, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend you, but I'm going to give you a little bit more of a personal history now. I hope I don't bore you. But in 1938, I was 4 years old, and I was living in Czechoslovakia. We had relatives in the United States that were telling my family in Czechoslovakia that you people got to get out of there. This guy Hitler, he's really serious. I mean, he's going to come into Czechoslovakia and he's going to do all kinds of terrible things. And my family was well enough situated that they could actually invite the president of Czechoslovakia over for dinner, and he came. And they asked him, is this really going to happen? And he said, yeah, it's going to happen, but there's nothing to worry about. He said, you've got to understand that Germany is the most prosperous, the most economically advanced, the most cultured, civilized country in Europe. Look at their art, look at their music, look at all of their institutions. They're going to come in here, but they're civilized people. They're not going to do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But the rest of my family, other than my father, looked around and said, I'm going to make my own decisions. I'm not going to go by what other people are saying. The rest of his family thought he was crazy. He packed his wife, my mother, me, 4 years old, a 4-year-old baby brother, and us, and we came to the United States. The rest of the family that thought he was crazy, they all died. Every one of them. They joined the resistance. They got caught. They were all executed, and their families were all executed. So, I tend to be a little bit cynical about governments. As I learned, is you make your own decisions based on what you see and not what other people tell you or what the common beliefs are. When I was in the service, I was in clandestine services because I did a lot of stuff with firearms. I was very glib as a young age, so I spoke a lot of European languages. I was a licensed pilot. They liked me. I did all kinds of crazy things. And I'd seen all the movies that we watched in those days, and we knew that the good guys always won and were immortal. But we had a sign in my office, and the sign in my office said, even paranoids have real enemies. Now, I want to run through some things, and I'm just going to give you some facts, which I look at as dots that I've connected my way, and you can connect them all your own way, whichever way you want to connect them. But I want to start out with a statement that Barack Obama made on July the 2nd in Colorado Springs. We cannot continue to rely on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well equipped, and just as well funded as the military.
Do they wear brown shirts?
Pardon me?
Are they going to wear brown shirts?
Yeah, that's, well, see, you're connecting the dots even faster than I am. That was my reaction. Are they going to wear brown shirts or are they going to wear the black shirts?
Depends on their age.
Have you ever has anybody noticed what's happening to the price of ammunition?
Yes.
Did you know that the Department of Homeland Security has ordered 450 million rounds of 40 caliber ammunition? And in each of the base and 4 option years, they've ordered the delivery of 35 million rounds of 223 ammunition. The U.S. population is 313,430,000. Well, I guess we each get a number of rounds, potentially.
We have more than they do.
I would submit to you that gun control is not gun control, that it's people control. And that we're being trained to accept it through all kinds of things, such as the training that's going on at the airport. No, that screening is almost completely useless for anything, except that it does condition people to follow orders and to comply. We have cameras that are watching us constantly, more and more. There are X-ray machines, X-ray type machines that are being deployed in New York City that can scan through clothing and look for people that are carrying anything that they want to provide the algorithms into the computers to spot, including particularly firearms. The Transportation Security Agency has got agents inspecting baggage and questioning passengers on buses in Houston city buses. If you're riding a bus, I guess you implied consent to be stopped and searched. I don't know that anybody that's refused, because I don't know what's happened, but that's just new. We know that there are detention camps being set up, that there are prisons being set up that are completely empty. There are prison buses down in Phoenix that nobody can understand why they're there and why they're being outfitted.
Are you kidding?
And what I'm saying to you is the same thing that I started out with. Nobody cares about you as much as you do. Nobody values your life, your freedom, or anything else as much as you do yourself. So make your own decisions and keep your powder dry.
Yes.
9/11.
Buy more ammo.
I will. I don't know how long I'll run, but I would be happy to enter into discussions or answer any questions.
You told us to write down 9/11?
Oh, 911. Yeah, I told you I would tell you the difference of two different 911 numbers. The number you've written down is completely ineffective. It's commonly known as dial-a-prayer. But I'll tell you the effective number. Put the number 1 in front of it and then read it. That works. A 1911 always works. Okay. There you go. Bring it up.
I had a question about the scenario you described in Berkeley. I guess I wasn't aware California had a stand your ground. I knew Florida did and a lot of other.
It is not statutory. The question is California's stand your ground law. We do not have a stand your ground statute. It exists by virtue of the court decisions. The courts have declared that a private citizen has the right to stand his ground, does not have a duty to retreat, and that exists not only in your own home, but in a public place. The problem with it is it doesn't stop you from getting arrested. It doesn't stop you from getting prosecuted. You will probably be acquitted if you can prove it.
Wouldn't it weaken your position if you were in your domicile? Once you exited it, you're no longer retreating or standing, you're advancing. And I suspect that if you're on your property, you have the right to stand your ground. But if you have retreated into your domicile, arm yourself, and re-emerge, you've probably lost your stand your ground protection.
Yeah, but you kill the guy who sees you do that. They can't testify.
You know,
Sure they can. He's dead outside.
There are a lot of questions, and look, it may be, it sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it's my own attitude, is that George Zimmerman may have actually been better off dead than where he is right now. His life is over. His life is over. He may be able to reconstruct and build another one, but what he's going through is something that I wouldn't wish certainly for myself or for anybody I know. Yes, sir.
I'd like you to continue down that line and discuss the prosecution of justified shootings. You said in California, urban areas or metropolitan areas, you will be prosecuted. Is there a law or an agreement by DAs or what goes into that? And is there any burden approach that would avoid that, being prosecuted or arrested for justified shooting?
Let me put it. It's a matter of policy. It is a matter of policy, and they are angry about guns, and they're angrier about guns as a result of the Heller and McDonald cases than they were before. because they see that this wave is rolling and they hate it and they don't want it. So I tell people, when we have our classes, we tell people that if you're lying in your bed at night some night and you hear the glass door being broken, and a guy comes in and says, "Smith, I hate your guts and I'm here to kill you," and you yell out, "Please don't, I'm armed, I will use my firearm to protect myself," and he still breaks into your bedroom and he's raising the knife to bring it down. At that point you shoot him, you'll probably be acquitted. But it may have to be at the appellate court level.
In California.
In California. That's just the culture that we live in.
Now that's not necessarily true in the outlying.
In the outlying areas. Let me tell you, I had a sheriff from one of the rural counties come to me a little while ago, and he wanted to issue concealed carry permits to anybody that came into his office and asked for it, as long as they passed a criminal background check. And he asked me if he could do that. And I had to tell him that there was a time that he could have done it. The police chief out there in Hialeah was issuing permits like that. They changed the law. The police chief and the sheriffs can only issue permits to people who reside or have a business in which they spend a substantial period of time inside their jurisdiction. So outlying counties, the culture is different. Yes, sir.
If you, as you well stated, California is an unfriendly gun state, can you name 2 or 3 of the friendliest gun states?
Oh,
42 of them.
Yeah, there are. Arizona is very good. Arizona recently went from issuing concealed carry permits to anybody who wasn't mentally defective and who was not a felon, to saying that any of those people who are not mentally defective and not convicted felons can carry without a permit. You do not need one. Washington State is very friendly, and if you get to Washington State, you can get a permit. A non-resident can get a permit. And not only that, you will find that there are places where public servants are friendly, helpful, cheerful, and anxious to please. And that is, and I will tell you that the sheriff's office in Seattle and in Vancouver, it was a shock to deal with those people. Vermont, no permit required. Alaska, no permit required. Arizona gives them out. Florida, you can get a non-resident permit by do it all by mail. You don't even have to go there. You have to go to Washington. Florida, you can do it all by mail. Let me tell you the advantage of doing that. First of all, you're now driving through Kansas, and you get pulled over, and somehow the police realize you have a firearm. And you show him your permit from Florida, your permit from Washington. First of all, he doesn't know whether there's reciprocity. Some states have reciprocity. You get those permits. Utah also, you can get a permit easily. Chances of the police officer knowing which one of these is good or not good in Kansas or in Missouri is pretty small. But what the officer does know is that this guy has passed a background check. He's not a criminal. He's not crazy. Somebody has decided he's a responsible citizen, so I can relax. So why should I hassle him? I'm going to give him my ticket and go on my way. So there is an advantage to getting them. And in fact, I think it's Wyoming just went the same route where you don't need a permit. I'm not sure if it's Wyoming, but I think it is. But they will issue permits to people in case they want to have one when they travel elsewhere. Yes, sir.
Just backing up just a little bit to the stand your ground law in California. Most states have a precursor of right to bear arms to defend yourself. California has our Constitution. Article 1, Section 1 gives you the right to defend liberty and life. It does not say life has to be inside your house.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just my life. It can be your life. Our Constitution for the state of California gives you that right. Each and every time a municipality passes a statute, they're taking away from your constitutional rights in the state of California.
Preemption.
Exactly.
That's right. And that is the basis for the court decisions that I mentioned, giving you the stand as your stand your ground law. That's the legal basis.
That's what we should be fighting for, is our constitutional rights established by the state of California.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Yes, sir. I will get to you next. This gentleman here in the middle.
Do you have any list or documentation of the location of detention camps so we could go to Google Earth and actually see if they exist?
And I'm sorry.
He wants to know if you have specific information for the location of the detention camps you're talking about. The prisons that you were talking about are being established.
If I do have it, but you can get it if you just Google detention facilities, you will find numerous articles on the subject. In addition, if you send me an email, I will be happy to give you specific citations. My email address is PT, just the initials, P as in Peter, T as in Tom, at CalAlum, one word, CALALUM.org. And if you want to read more about the Trayvon Martin case, there are two places I could refer you. There's an online magazine called The American Thinker. And if you go back to March 25th, Sunday, March the 25th, you will see an article by somebody named Kerr, Kerr Mudgeon, Mudgeon. And that's me. I didn't want Al Sharpton at my front door, so I used that as a pen name. And if you want to have some fun looking at some really sarcastic stuff, go to there's a blog that I published called Mudgeon's Musings, MUDGEONSMUSINGS.blogspot.com, and there's an article there 3 or 4 days ago on the Trayvon Martin case called something about Florida offering up a human sacrifice to appease the savage mobs. And there are citations there to 4 really excellent academic much more sophisticated articles than I'm giving you here. But they're linked, and you can reach them there. Yes, sir.
Who initiates the rules by which the sheriff of Santa Clara County denies concealed carry permits?
The sheriff.
Why he denies concealed carry permits?
Who initiates those rules? It's the main
He
issue
wants
by
to
state law.
know who makes the rules for the sheriff to deny or permit a license.
That's an interesting point, and it is under challenge. The U.S. Supreme Court, happily, has declared that the Second Amendment does confer on all of us an individual right, and that right is to keep and bear arms. Keep means you can have them. Bear means you can carry them. Now, in California, you can no longer carry openly, so which means you have to carry concealed. If that is a right, how can that right be subject to some individual law enforcement officer's discretion? If it's a right, how can it be discretionary? the California statute, the California law that this lady was saying we were trying to establish specific rules, but the present California law is that the chief legal law enforcement officer in every city and in every county can, at his discretion, give or deny concealed carry permits. I don't believe that's constitutional, but I do not expect to live long enough to see my view substantiated in court. I'm an old codger, so, you know, they say there's some good things about getting old, but I can't remember what any of them are. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah, ma'am.
Sounds like we should start building some prisons.
Pardon me?
Sounds like we should start building some prisons.
Oh, actually, I think guillotines would work just fine. Yeah, gibbets and guillotines. Yes, sir.
Have you heard about Mitt Romney and his control?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you say it again, please? Louder.
You must know about Mitt Romney is going
Mr. Romney does not have a great Second Amendment record, but he's recently been saying some of the right things, but there was, look, yeah, I don't want to cast my lot with any of the kinds of politicians any of us have seen in recent years. I'm tired of voting for the lesser of the evils that are thrown at us by these ticks. Anybody else? Okay. No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention that 911 is absolutely worthless. I had to call them twice in a week, about 3 weeks ago. And one day after another, both times I ended up hanging up on 911 because they just didn't get it. And so I said, fine, forget it. I was trained, you're supposed to actually put in the fire department of your county in there so they can route you to the right place. Because otherwise you call 911 in my county, you end up in Solano County instead of calling your office as sheriff. So you have to explain what city you're in, what county you're in, what the crossing. They don't get anything. It took me almost 10 minutes on the phone, so they still didn't get it.
You're absolutely right. And let me tell you, I'm going to tell you a couple of funny stories. I will get to you next, sir. You and then you. I'm going to tell you a couple of funny stories about 911. If you call 911 in Los Angeles, they have a checklist of questions that they're going to ask you. That's after you're on hold for about 20 minutes. They will come on and they will ask you a list of questions. And one of the questions that they're going to ask you, now, you're calling 911 because there's somebody, breaking into your house. One of the questions they're going to ask you is anybody underwater? Why? Because they showed up at one 911 call. The 911 call was called because somebody had fallen into a swimming pool and they drowned, and they came without the resuscitation equipment, and they got sued. And so now the 911 operator always asks, is anybody underwater? My other story, you're going to love this one. This one's a really good one. A friend of mine, who is a senior police officer in San Francisco, traveled with his family a while back down to Florida. And as he left the airport in his rent-a-car, he noticed that he was being followed by another car, sort of a disreputable-looking car with some disreputable-looking people in it. And when he got off the freeway, they cut him off. And so he gets out of the car, and this guy is coming toward him. And he's armed. The guy is carrying a tire iron. And my friend is a police officer, so he's carrying his pistol. He's carrying his pistol. And he says, stop or I'll shoot. This guy was high on something. He kept coming. And so he shot him. And the guy falls down. and he's lying in the street bleeding. So my friend gets back to his car, gets on his cell phone, calls 911, and says, there's been a shooting, which is the right thing to say. And he waits. Well, first of all, he's on hold for a long time, and when then the operator comes on and he says, "There's been a shooting," and she says, "Well, please hold, sir." And he says, "No, you don't understand. This isn't something trivial. There's been a shooting." She says, "I'm working 22 shootings right now, sir. I'll be with you as quick as I can." So eventually they come back on and they dispatch 2 young officers to the scene. And while he's waiting, this guy crawls to the car that he's come out of and gets in the car, and the car drives away. So now he's standing there waiting for the police to come. The police arrive, and they look, and they ask him, "What happened? Why did you call?" And he says, "Well, I was attacked. I was threatened by these people, and I shot them." They said, "Well, you missed, didn't you?" He says, "Because they're not here." He says, "No, I didn't miss. Look at the pool of blood over there." He says, "Well, just what do you want us to do, sir?" And he said, "Well, I'm from California. In California, if there's a shooting, you got, there's all kinds of paperwork and everything to fill out. I don't understand." He says, "Look," he says, "what you don't understand is that in Florida, everybody's got a concealed carry permit, so they get people leaving the airports with rent-a-cars because they figure they're tourists and they're not going to be carrying. They didn't count on getting a police officer. But there's nothing for us to do here. If you want to wait here for them to come back, you're free to do that. But we're leaving." So, yes, sir.
This young lady's suggestions that we build prisons, they're already built. We already paid for them. Let's just change the residence.
Yeah, well, I don't want to feed these people. Go ahead.
No officer advice on search and seizure or search of personal homes. If there's been some kind of a burglary or a drug-related incident, and the police go door to door and they knock on your door and they ask to search your house, search your car, search your garage, and you're a NRA-like member, you're going to ask things that are going to hurt their interest rapidly.
You are, and I would tell them to go get a warrant. You're not welcome in this house without a warrant.
And is that going to then hurt their interest even more that you're harboring the person that they're looking for?
It may, but they will not. The chances are they're not going to come in. They're not going to force, and they're not going to get a warrant. You're refusing to let them in. This does not constitute probable cause.
Exigent circumstances.
I'm sorry.
You said that the Patriot Act allows them to do it?
Well, they're not federal officers. They're not. I mean, you're getting into a whole different area. In our training, we tell people that if you're involved in a shooting and the police, you call the police afterwards, or that you don't talk to them. You say, "Officer, I'll be happy to answer your questions as soon as my lawyer is here." And there's a reason to do that, a very good reason. Now, all rules have a exception. If you shot one guy and the other guy ran away and you saw him throw a weapon. You threw a weapon into the bushes. You might want to call that to the attention of the officer. So there are exceptions, but generally, the reason you don't want to talk to an officer is in an unstructured setting. Is they're not going to remember the details of what you told them. And there's a very famous case in which in New York, a Hasidic Jew who was a diamond merchant and had a permit to carry a concealed weapon was driving, carrying some of his diamonds in the car. And he was driving and he was in a traffic jam, and a guy in another car looked over at him and said, "Oh, you SOB, I know you, and I'm going to kill you," and got out of the car and approached him, and he had a baseball bat, and the guy shot him. And the shooter was arrested, of course. And he told this story to the police officer. And when he came to trial, the police officer is sitting there, and actually it was a detective, homicide detective, said, he was on the stand, and he said, they asked him, "Do you remember such and such a day?" "Oh, yeah, I remember it well. It was 3 years ago." "Yeah, I remember it well." And he's going through his notebook trying to figure out. He says, "Yeah, the defendant said, 'Oh, you SOB, I'm going to kill you.'" You got it completely backwards. "You SOB, I'm going to kill you." It was in an unstructured setting. It was on the street. The officer wasn't lying. He just, he was trying to. He didn't remember what had happened 3 years ago. How many shootings do you suppose he had investigated since then? So he's reading his notes, and he's in a hurry. He's on the stand. He got it wrong. The shooter went to jail. The case was reversed, but it was about 2.5 years later that the guy spent 2.5 years actually he was in Attica. Yes, sir.
I can shed a little light on how 911 works in San Jose. It may not be the same elsewhere. Historically, if you dial 911 from your residence, they know where that phone's connected, so they know what to do with it. In San Jose, the ratio of police calls to fire calls on a given shift is about 4 to 1. On a typical weekday, non-weekend, non-summer, hot night kind of stuff, a typical weekday like last week, in one shift, they get about 1,000 calls.
911 calls?
Yes, just from San Jose. 800 of those calls, 8 hours. So the way it's arranged is the calls go into police dispatch first, because the ratio is 80% that need a police response and 20% need a fire or medical response. If it's a fire or medical response, the police dispatcher, and if you want, you can go there and get a tour, like ride along in a cop car. You can ride along in the police dispatch. They'll transfer the call for all your information, like where you were and kind of stuff, goes to the fire people. They determine whether or not it's a code A, B, C, or D, if it's a health thing or if it's a fire thing, and decide what to dispatch. As time has progressed, their ability to know where you are, if you have a cell phone, is improved, but not perfect. If you're in the city and you're on a cell phone and you want a perfect response, you dial 277-8911, and instead of being routed to Ukiah Highway Patrol, you'll go to the city of San Jose.
Most places have a different number for cell phones for an emergency police call or fire call. And that's where the guy in Berkeley called. He called the emergency cell phone number. There are a lot of calls. Police get a lot of calls, and there are people that call 911 for all kinds of bizarre reasons. Some people are regular callers. There are regular callers. The fellow that got killed in Berkeley was a guy who never would have called 911 unless it really was a real emergency. But they have no way of knowing that. Yes, sir. I'm not going to cut you guys off. Go ahead.
Yeah. About 35 years ago, at 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody's beating on my door trying to break it down. I go to the door. My wife is dialing 911. 10 minutes later, approximately, the cops arrive. Well, I chased the guy off with my 911. 1911.
Yes, sir. I got it.
One 911.
I won 911. And a couple days later, the police come by and they say that, well, we finally figured out what happened. That the guy was a wino that was sent up to find out if anybody was at home. If anybody was at home, then the bad guys would go away. That's what happened. And they found the wino in our next door neighbor's front yard, passed out. You know, wine does that to some people.
Yeah. Well, but you've raised an interesting point.
The point is 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was 35 years ago or so.
Yeah.
You know,
Please make the call when
It's
the
worse.
seconds count.
Yeah, there's a saying that when seconds count, the police are just minutes away. But you raised a very good point. In California, in the United States, about 80% of all burglaries are cold burglaries, and that cold burglary is one in which there's nobody home. And burglars spend a lot of time casing houses to try to figure out to make sure that there's nobody home. Now the reason for that is because of the Second Amendment. We own guns. They don't want to get shot. Great Britain, which used to have a lot of guns, has many more burglaries, and more than 50% of them are hot burglaries because the burglar doesn't care that there's somebody in there because they know that he's not going to be armed. And if he is armed, or even if he defends himself with a baseball bat or a cricket thing, whatever they use in cricket, that the homeowner is going to be the one that's arrested, and that the burglar is going to be able to sue him and win. Yes, sir.
Little friend is deputy district attorney, or deputy sheriff, I think he got promoted. He said, as a deputy sheriff, you get called to a hot site, pull your gun and do something, you'll be in trouble. So it's easier to wait until the incident is over and go make a report.
Well, somebody died. Meanwhile, somebody gets killed.
Now, he said if you're really in trouble, what you do is you call and say, officer down.
Well, there's a wonderful joke about the old guy that calls because there's a guy prowling around his house, and he actually gets the police, and they tell him that, well, we're really busy right now, we'll get there when we can. So he hangs up, and he waits a few minutes, and he calls back and says, don't worry, you don't have to hurry, I've shot the guy. And 2 minutes later, there are 3 helicopters, 6 SWAT cars, and 40 police officers swarming over the place, and they go out and back and they find this guy still prowling around the yard. And the police chief walks over to the old guy and says, I thought you said you shot the guy. And the old guy looks at him and says, I thought you said you didn't have anybody you could send. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's worth now or if it's even acceptable, but about 15 years ago, I lived in Southern California. 15 years ago, I had a phone that had an emergency and I was on the button on it. And one morning I woke up and reached over to hit my alarm and apparently bumped the phone. And apparently it hit the emergency button. I mean, and it's just enough to take up, go get the emergency, and then come back down. Went up, took a shower and came out and bang, bang, bang. And here's 2 big linebacker police calls on my doorstep. Did you call 911? No. He said, well, somebody called 911 and hung up. So, be here alone. We can get it. They came and checked out, make sure I wasn't home, hospital, whatever. So if you dial 911 and hang up, you might get somebody to come out right away.
Well, one of the things we tell people is if you're ever involved in a shooting at your home, if somebody comes in and you have to shoot them, if you have to, it's not something you want to do. Believe me, it's not something you want to do. But if you're forced to do it and you've shot somebody, put everything away and leave. Do not stay there. Go to a friend's house, a neighbor's house, a corner drugstore, and then call the police. Identify yourself and say, and this is all you say, there's been a shooting at this address. And then you wait. You wait. and the police will come. They will come for a shooting, and you don't want to be in the house. Because the chances are they're not going to go into the house. The chances are that they're going to come on with their cars and they're going to point the headlights at the house. And they will sit there and wait, but they will have their guns out. They will be pointed at the house. And you don't want to be in the house. Now, it's nighttime. Like the example I've given you, it's nighttime. So those officers are not the senior police officers that have been around for a long time. They're the young officers, and they're nervous, and they're pointing guns at your house, and they're waiting. Do you want to walk out there into those headlights? Or do you want to wait for them to... I mean, they'll eventually send Jethro the Wonder Dog in there probably. And they'll get there eventually. When things have calmed down and they put their guns away, you don't want to approach them when they've got their guns out. You walk up and say, "Officer, I'm the one who called. I'm the one who called." That identifies you at a good time. And you'll probably get arrested, and you don't talk to them unless I say you've got something that's exculpatory that you want to show them. But don't approach the police when they've got their guns out. It's not a good idea. Go ahead.
He was next, but real quick. One thing about police officers, they have sworn an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of their state. They do not have any responsibility whatsoever to defend you as an individual.
No.
They have to. Any government employee, their responsibility is to serve and protect. And calling 911 is not protection. The only protection you have is a baseball bat that's necessary, a BB gun, a knife, or your knife, 1911.
Yeah, there are court decisions where police have actually witnessed a crime, a violent crime going down, and they have not responded. And the courts have always held that there is no duty to defend anybody. Now, that is not to say that there are not some really good, dedicated officers who will go out on a limb and do what is appropriate.
At that point, they're exercising the Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution.
That's right. And my best shooting buddy, other than the lady who runs the Gunslingers Journal right here, is a homicide detective in Richmond. He's now retired. But he's working on contract and making more money on an hourly basis than he ever did as an officer on the force. But he has always believed that every citizen should be armed all the time.